hearts will be warmed and blessed by their gift.
And as much as I appreciate him taking the hit for that, it was me. I didn't tell him, so you can't report what you don't know.
They're going to grab some stools and some microphones, and I'm going to interview them. And yeah, I'll grab it. I got it. There was no way I was getting up out of one of those little stools, so. We talked about a few questions that they would answer today, and so you met Mike Kreider a couple weeks ago, and heard a little bit about his story, but not enough. And Greg Detweiler, if you don't know, he's my son-in-law, married to my oldest daughter, and I'll let him introduce himself to you this morning as we talk about God's call on our life. So I thought I'd start with the question, the question for each of these guys. Just tell me how the Lord became real to you in your life. Tell me how you came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe alphabetical. How about we go Detweiler and then Kreider, and then we'll reverse it. How's that?
Okay. I grew up in a Christian household. My parents were firm believers, and remember just, we would go to bed and we'd read our kids' Bible, and we'd pray, and I just always remember believing in God. I know there was a time where I didn't believe in God, but I can't physically remember that. And so growing up, I always just believed in God, knew what Jesus did on the cross to die to save us from our sins, and just always knew that. And it probably wasn't until college where I really grew in my faith. So when I went off to college, I went to Millersville, and I'm not from the Lancaster area, so went to Millersville, didn't know a lot of people. I knew like one person person. And it was like totally new environment, totally new setting, you're away from your family. And the only thing that stayed consistent in my life was my faith. And so I really pressed into my faith during that time, and I really grew. And you'll hear more about it later, but that was the time where I really grew into God and really got to know God. So, yeah.
Mike, do you want to share how you
Sure.
know Christ?
Yeah. I was just thinking it's ironic we're talking about the Reformation today. I was born and raised Catholic, actually. I'm from Landisville and everything. Again, similar to Greg, I was, raised to believe in God. I don't really know if there was a time when in my life I didn't believe in God. I can't really remember that, but I know my actions told a completely different story pretty early on. So, a lot of times after school, I was, going off and doing drugs with my friends and stuff like that. I ended up getting, invited to the youth group here, Burn, a couple years ago. So that would have been in about 2009. And I don't remember what passage of scripture was spoken about that night or anything like that. But what I remember was the Bible was presented, and then somebody said, "Here's what that means." And I had never had that second step before. It had always been read to me. I understood who Jesus was, that sort of thing. So I think that's when God really became real to me. As far as when I really started following him, that was a different story. I don't know if you can share about that now.
Sure, just take me on with the shit.
Sure, yeah. So I think early on, following God in high school for me meant doing a lot of things, or doing a lot of things differently. So, like for example, I changed my friend group because I didn't want to hang out with people who were bad influences on me and causing me to, do other things that I shouldn't be doing, that I knew I shouldn't be doing. It also meant, going to church more often and, reading the Bible, like all really good things. But I wouldn't say the process of following Christ became real to me again, like Greg said, until college. That was when I really understood the gospel and what it meant. I up until that point realized, okay, Jesus died for me. Like, that's great. I wouldn't say this, but I believed functionally I'm still a pretty good person. Like, I'm going to church on Sundays. I'm doing the right things. I'm reading the Bible. Like, what more can God ask of me? And I was reflecting on Isaiah chapter 1 earlier this week, where Isaiah says to the people of Israel, he says, "Hear the word of the Lord." And I think it's in verses 13 and 14. The Lord is saying something to the effect of, I hate that you keep these feasts that I've asked you to keep. I hate that you continue sacrificing to me. And you're like, well, why would, you're scratching your head, right? Why would God hate these things that he's commanded Israel to do? It's because their hearts are far from him. And so, if you guys are anything like me, I think of a rebel as like the guy with like the skull cap, and he's like riding a motorcycle, smoking a cigarette. I found out actually the picture of a rebel was me in my Sunday best in a church pew, praising the Lord during worship, all the while my heart was far from him, and God hates that. And so when I understood my need for Christ, I really grasped that my freshman year at Kutztown. That was when following Christ really became real.
Thanks. Both guys. Sometimes we think college students are lost. No hope, right? But students get serious about their faith in college. It's a real place to get serious about your faith because you're at the intersection of life and experiences. And both guys here had a profound change in their lives in college. Mike, let's start with you. The second question, when did you sense God speaking into your life, and what was that experience like?
That's a good question. Man. I think it would probably go back to the spring semester of 2015. I was a sophomore. I shared a little bit about a couple guys that I had been discipling a few weeks ago. I had been meeting with about 5 guys that semester once a week for an hour at a time. We would talk scripture, we would talk life. I was helping lead Bible studies and things like that. And I think that was the semester when I began to realize I've never been more exhausted, and I've never loved serving the Lord more than this. So I think that was when I started to see it as like, physically, like I just can't keep doing this, but like spiritually, this is what I feel like the Lord has given me a passion for. Fortunately, that was 2 years before I graduated, so I had 2 more years to really process that and walk through those things. So I think that was kind of the beginning of it. Then from there, it was just stages. So the Lord opened a lot of doors for various internships, serving Him in Kutztown and things like that. Eventually, it became what I believe was a calling into full-time ministry. So it was kind of little steps along the way.
Okay. Greg, what about you? When did you sense God speaking into your life, and what was that experience like, if you can describe it?
For me, I'm going to tell you 2 stories. The first one, it starts out my freshman year of college, spring semester. This would have been October 2010. There was a morning where what I would do in the morning, I would wake up, and I'd kind of get ready, and then I'd read a little devotional. I had it was My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. It's like a daily devotional, and it gives you each day it gives you a little something. And I was reading that, and this particular morning it was like, do you ever feel like you don't hear from God? Do you ever feel like God's not speaking to you? And it went on to say, it's because you haven't totally surrendered your life. And it said more, but as I continued to read, and at the end of it, I finished, and I prayed, and I was like, God, help me to get to that point of total surrender. And in that moment, I saw myself up on a stage, speaking passionate about something. And I could see the silhouettes of people listening to me. And it was just a moment. And it was like, I don't even know, it might have been like a second. And it was over. And I was just like, whoa, what was that? And instantly I started thinking, God, you called me to be a pastor. And didn't have a lot of time to process that. Kind of had to run off to class and all that. But then in that semester, I had a break in between my first and second class. I had like an hour. And so I came back to my dorm room after that, and I just like came up with a bunch of excuses. Like, God, I can't do that. I can't talk in front of people. I'm not a big talker. I can't interpret the Bible like some of these preachers do. I can't do that. I don't have the gifting to do something like that. And just had all these excuses, all sorts of excuses. And finally I ran out of excuses and was like, okay, I should read my Bible. And where at the time I was reading in Luke, and I had finished where I'd left off before. It was in Luke 8. It was right before Jesus calms the storm, and so that's where I picked up. And the story goes that, the disciples, they're crossing the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is sleeping, and this big storm comes up, and it's tossing the boat around, and the disciples are scared, and they wake Jesus up, and Jesus calms the storm, and then he turns to his disciples, and he says, and my Bible's the NIV version, and in Luke it says, "Where is your faith?" And that hit me hard. Like I started just crying, because I was questioning the God of the universe, questioning, the God who's called me, who's made me who I am. And I'm telling him what I can and cannot do. And I just remember just crying about that, and really just seeing, God he can do whatever he wants. And so as time went on, I kind of tried to convince myself that, maybe God's calling me to something different. Maybe God's not calling me to be a pastor, or maybe it had a different meaning. And so jump ahead to, this would be my senior year, January of 2014. A group of us went up to the Bower Mission, which is like a soup pantry up in New York City that'll feed the homeless in New York City. And what they do is, before anyone can get fed, they have to sit through a chapel service. And we were up there, and the people that night, the people that were supposed to do it, didn't show up, and it's like 10 minutes before we're supposed to do this. And so we're told, hey, you need to, our group needs to come up with what we're going to do for chapel. And our spiritual leader of the group, his name was Ryan, he kind of turned to me, he's like, Greg, you're going to speak tonight. And I was like, okay. So I figured out what I was going to say. And so then we get downstairs, and the people that were supposed to show up showed up. And I was like, great. And I was like, hey, Ryan, I don't have to speak now, right? He's like, no, you're still speaking. So they did their thing, we did our thing. I got up, I spoke. It was probably like 5 minutes. Nothing much, but we got up to, we served food, and then we went up to our little quarters, and we're just relaxing and talking. And Ryan's like, Greg, have you ever felt like you've been called to be a pastor? And I told him the story I just told you, and he's like, Greg, this is going to sound really weird. When I was 12 or 13, I had a dream like that about me, where I was up on a stage speaking passionate about something, and I saw silhouettes of people. He's like, Greg, we're called to be pastors. And to me, like, that was just God, reaffirming. Like, Greg, hey, I meant what I said. So yeah, that's my experience.
So notice, Greg had a definite experience, maybe once or twice, vision, dream, whatever you call it. Mike's process is small little decisions and steps that he took. Notice how God is faithful in each situation. Not one is more right than the other. Not one is better than the other. And yet God calls. God speaks. So now Greg's alluded to a little bit, so I'll start with Greg. But tell me, the two of you, in about 5 minutes that we have, so you got to share about 5 minutes here, 5 or 6 minutes. Not each. You got, you're going to be pastors, so I get this. But just tell me what God is calling you to do. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it. We want, tell me what God is now calling you to do. You've had this experience. You've readied yourself to listen. You've heard God, and now what is He calling you to do? As near as you can tell.
I think He's calling me to be a pastor. Right now, I don't know what that looks like totally. Right now, I'm taking classes through Liberty, so I'm working full-time and taking classes part-time, and so that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm going to try and share this real quick experience. So over the summer, I was kind of feeling down about my job, and was like, okay, God, maybe, am I supposed to, start looking for something, start, looking, at, a youth pastor position or something like that, and started talking to Emily about that, and then, like, later that week, I had a meeting with my boss, and we had these bi-weekly meetings, and she, after our meeting, or at the end of our meeting, she's like, Greg, I want to give you a raise. And this is like July, and our raises don't come till like January. And she's just like, I just want to make sure you're happy, and that you're content, and we appreciate you. And so to me, like, that was God saying, hey, stay where you're at. I got something else coming for you. So I don't know what that is, but I'm just trying to take it one step at a time. So,
Mike, what's God calling you to do?
Yeah, I opened up to 2 Corinthians 5 as I was thinking about this question a little bit. So here's what Paul says, specifically in verse 18. He says, all this is from God, meaning this, the ministry of reconciling people back to the Lord, who through Christ reconciled us to Himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So there's a receiving of the ministry of reconciliation, and then there's a joining in it. So what has God called me to? I think what God has called all of us to is to be ministers of reconciliation. For me specifically, that's going to be occupationally with disciple makers, doing college ministry on campuses in Pennsylvania.
If there would be time, I'd let you ask them questions, but we don't have time. But one of the things that I wanted you to hear today, loud and clear, I hope you were listening, that God calls us, each of us, to something, to some kind of ministry for Him. Sometimes it's on college campuses. Sometimes it's, I'm not sure yet. I'm still exploring. You know, when God called me while I sat in school suspension at Hempfield High School as an adult, it was very specific. Go and make a difference in the lives of teenagers. And like Mike, over the years, God shifted and changed my call to where now I'm a senior pastor of a church. Never thought that would happen. You know, it's I think Mike, both of these guys said it. It's being ready to listen, to receive, and then trusting that God is asking you to do what he's asking you to do, and then not questioning the God of the universe because you think you know better, but to trust that you will have the ability because God created you. And if you don't have the ability right up to the speed that you think you ought to have it, he'll give it to you. I mean, to me, as I thought about how to just kind of close this time of the worship service, it's simple, and you heard it from both guys. You know, God uses his word to speak to us. God uses our prayers to speak to us. God often uses other people to speak to us. You know, the question is, are we listening? Are we readying our hearts to listen? And then when we hear, will we respond? Samuel responded. And over the next couple weeks, we're going to look at the life of Samuel. He entered into being a prophet for God, one who speaks for God. And so I want us to close in prayer over these two guys because God has called them in service to him. God is calling you to be in service to him. And we want to pray God's blessing over both of them as we'll see Greg around more. I don't know where God's going to send Mike. I hope it's to Millersville or F&M, somewhere close, selfishly. But it may not be. You know, that's a selfish prayer. It would be great to have these two guys around a lot doing ministry with us. But I trust God and his kingdom plan. And one day he'll take Emily and Greg and send them out into the kingdom. He's going to take Mike and send him out into the kingdom. And because of their faithful and listening to the call of God. So let me pray for them, and then I'll send them on their way. God, we praise you and thank you that you call us, that you're still speaking today. Father, that you have a desire for us to go into the world, like Mike reminded us, to reconcile, to make peace, to show people how to love. Father, it's not something we opt out on. As disciples of yours, that's the calling you've placed on all of our lives. How we go about that is up to us, but it's up to us listening to you to tell us how to do that. So Father, I pray your blessing on these two young men as they have heard from you and are now pursuing a calling to serve you in the world. Thank you for their lives. Thank you for their testimony and their witness. I pray your blessing on them, Lord, and help them to know that they always have a church family to come back to. Always a church family to lean on, to know that they'll get support and prayer coverage and anything they need from this church family. Lord, thank you for blessing us with these two young men, for blessing us with your Son, Jesus Christ, who gives us the ability to minister in your name. Even in our broken sinfulness, Lord, you make a way that we can be cleansed and redeemed to go out in the world and make a difference for you. Be with us in Jesus' name. And all God's people said. Thanks, guys. You guys can just leave your